Yeah, I wanted to readdress wildland fire concerns and just to think about some probability issues with wildland fire. I put together this website several years ago. I just wanted to go ahead and review some of the slides in it because what it effectively does is explain this principle of a probabilistic approach to analyzing and fixing the big problems rather than the small ones. Now, this particular figure here in the middle, I derived this from a document published in the 1970s. I think it was entitled How Safe is Too Safe? And the observation I have is, particularly in the federal world, we focus on things that have very little return. So, down in this category. So, you have a very significant cost for a very small return on overall safety. Whereas in industry, when money really is a factor in calculating safety, you're focusing on the big pieces, the significant effects for small dollars. Let's give you some specific examples. Let's use an example of sodium halide lights, established as a standard for construction, several decades ago, installed in a structure I was working on. We had a fire about 20 years ago associated with a burst sodium halide light. Rained down some sparks and some material, smoldered. It really wasn't a fire. But what it did is when you're talking about a couple thousand of these lights, and you have a very small probability for each light rupturing, well, what's the overall chance that any one light's going to cause a problem? It's negligible. When you have a couple thousand, it becomes something measurable. So the campaign was put into place to go ahead and replace those lights. So one light was found a few years ago in a mezzanine location that wasn't changed out. There was no danger, there was no material stored under it that was combustible, but one of the facility managers came to me and said they insist on changing it. And I told, hey, look, if you go change that out, what's going to happen? You're going to have an electrician with a ladder that's 18 feet high underneath this light, changing it out for a risk that's extremely low. Well, what's the higher risk? That the electrician is going to hurt himself while fixing the light, falling off the ladder, being electrocuted, hurting himself, whatever it may be. There's a higher risk associated with fixing the safety problem than leaving the unsafe condition of that light bulb. So you have to balance this out. People in Congress often look in black and white, binary terms. Nothing's binary. Everything has fuzzy logic attached to it and a statistical probability that should be considered. So what I'm quoting here, this particular graph, I think is very important to understand, and that is what makes the decision. How do you make the decision in terms of is something good, is something bad, is it something acceptable? When you're dealing with, for instance, a nuclear facility, what you want to do is avoid complications that have permanent environmental consequences or loss of life. You want to keep those from happening to 1 out of every 10,000 years. It's usually a target, 10 to the minus fourth. Let me show you what I mean by some of this. So when you're doing a risk assessment in terms of what is acceptable, you think fire suppression, automatic sprinklers are really the holy grail, and they are not. I want to be clear about that. The National Fire Protection Association has quantified efficacy thresholds for fire extinguishment via suppression systems at about 80%. Take, for example, I think it was in 2022, the San Jose Home Depot burned down completely. A shoplifter ignited a aisle, products on an aisle to get away with his stolen merchandise, burned down the entire structure. I mean, leveled it. I mean, it had a dynamite suppression system too. But what I want to point out is that's an example where you suppression is not foolproof. It's in fact oftentimes it doesn't come on because the valve's shut. Inspection, testing, and maintenance routines were not done appropriately, rendering the system inoperable. So NFPA has specified about an 80% efficacy. If you look at nuclear facilities, it's more like 92%. So let's just take a look at it. Generally speaking, you can have a frequency. Frequency of fires is something measurable through history. But generally speaking, about 5% is reasonable. So probability of ignition in a year is about 5%. These numbers are derived from empirical data. Generally speaking, you have about a 90% efficacy rate for automatic suppression. Um, you normally, though, 9 times out of 10, if you see a fire, you're just going to manually, quickly, and promptly illuminate it through a fire extinguisher. Um, Oftentimes, the fire department has to show up, a manual delay detection. They're going to have maybe a 19 out of 20 times they're going to be able to put out a fire successfully. So you add all these up. If you follow this out, it comes down to about 2 times out of 10,000 events. So it's basically 2 times out of 10,000 years where you're going to lose your facility, a major facility, with all of these fire protection features in it. What you need to really ask yourself is, and with climate change, with the challenges to predict fire behavior in a drier climate, with an increased combustible loading due to environmental concerns, no thinning of the forest, or such as not cutting fire lines in Southern California, that did result in a faster fire spread. That was due to environmental protection. With these things, what is the critical threshold for acceptance for wildland fire propagation? You have to ask yourself, what is the likelihood, annual likelihood, that you're going to have a wildland fire in any given area, whether it's Georgia, California, or Oregon? You have to ask yourself, is it within a 1 out of 10,000 year event that could result in a serious conflagration? That question in and of itself drives an obvious conclusion that, yeah, you're going to have a more likely threshold of 1 out of every 10,000 years. So what does that trigger? It triggers the necessity to do additional wildland fire preps, such as adoption in a local municipality of, let's say, the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, or NFPA 1140, or in the case of California, California Building Code Chapter 7A. Hey, thanks for listening to this. You have a good day.